The emergency beacon from Kepler station cut through hyperspace like a scream in the dark. Commander ZYX Thera felt her dorsal plates ripple with unease as the message played across her command deck. Her ship, the Talon of Vengeance, had been en route to the Coalition staging grounds when the distress signal reached them. Kepler station under attack. Unknown hostiles. Requesting immediate assistance. Coalition forces. Coalition forces are. The transmission dissolved into static, then, nothing. ZYX Thera's secondary eyes focused on the tactical display while her primary eyes remained fixed on the viewscreen. In all her years serving the Coalition, she had never heard such raw panic in a transmission. The Kethmori didn't panic. They were among the most disciplined military forces in the galaxy, descendants of a warrior culture that had conquered 3 star systems before joining the Coalition peacefully. Commander, her navigation officer, a young Velterun named Quintel, spoke with barely controlled fear. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures at Kepler station. The readings they're unlike anything in our databases. ZYX Thera's mandibles clicked together in thought. Her ship was a light cruiser, fast and well-armed but not built for extended combat against unknown forces. Standard Coalition protocol would be to retreat and report back to command. But the Kethmori garrison at Kepler station included over 3,000 soldiers and their families. Set course for Kepler station, maximum velocity, she ordered. And send a coded transmission to Coalition command. Tell them we're investigating the distress signal. The journey through hyperspace felt longer than usual, though ZYX Thera knew it was only her imagination. She spent the time reviewing everything they knew about Kepler station. It was a minor outpost, primarily used for refueling and minor repairs. The system had 3 inhabitable planets, but only 1 supported Coalition settlements. Nothing strategic, nothing that would attract serious attention from pirates or rival factions. When they dropped out of hyperspace, ZYX Thera immediately understood why the transmission had ended so abruptly. Kepler station was gone. Not destroyed in the usual sense, but consumed. Where the station had orbited the system's second planet, only twisted metal debris floated in space. The metal itself was wrong somehow, blackened and warped as if something had tried to digest it. By the ancient spirits, Quintel whispered. What could have done this? Before ZYX Thera could respond, her tactical officer barked out a warning. Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Unknown configuration. The ships that appeared were unlike anything in Coalition records. They were organic in appearance, their hulls seeming to pulse with an internal rhythm. Bone-white surfaces were covered in what looked like veins or arteries, and, as ZYX Thera watched, she realized the ships were actually breathing. Open communications channels, she ordered, though her combat instincts were already screaming warnings. Unknown vessels, this is Coalition cruiser Talon of Vengeance. You are in violation of Coalition space. Identify yourselves and state your intentions. The response came not through their communication systems, but directly into their minds. The voice was like the sound of dying stars, vast and terrible and hungry. We are hunger. We are consumption. We are the end of all things. Your flesh will feed us. Your thoughts will nourish us. Your civilization will become part of us. ZYX Thera had served in dozens of conflicts, faced pirates and rogue AI ships and territorial disputes between member species. But this was different. This was something that should not exist, something that made her deepest evolutionary instincts scream in terror. All hands to battle stations, she commanded, proud that her voice remained steady. Prepare for combat. The battle was hopeless from the beginning. The organic ships moved like living creatures, dodging their weapons with impossible grace. When Coalition fire did strike them, the wounds sealed themselves within seconds. Worse, the enemy weapons seemed designed specifically to cause maximum pain and terror. Instead of clean energy beams, they fired projectiles that burrowed into ship hulls and began consuming them from the inside. ZYX Thera watched her tactical display as 3 more Coalition ships dropped out of hyperspace, drawn by the automatic distress beacon her ship had been broadcasting. A heavy cruiser and 2 destroyers, enough firepower to level a small moon. The organic ships turned to face them with what could only be described as enthusiasm. The new arrivals lasted 17 minutes. As her own ship's shields failed and hull breaches began appearing throughout the vessel, ZYX prepared herself for death. In her culture, there was honor in dying well in battle. She would face these creatures with dignity, even if she could not defeat them. That was when the human ship appeared. It dropped out of hyperspace with none of the graceful emergence protocols used by coalition vessels. Instead, it simply materialized in space like a predator pouncing on prey. The ship itself was unremarkable, a medium-sized vessel with clean lines and efficient design. Nothing about it suggested the capability to challenge the organic monstrosities that had destroyed 5 coalition ships. Unknown vessel, ZYX transmitted, retreat immediately. These entities are beyond current tactical capabilities. Save yourselves while you can. The human response was immediate and utterly unexpected. Negative, coalition ship. We're here to help. Suggest you move to minimum safe distance and observe. Before ZYX could reply, the human ship opened fire. But, instead of the energy weapons favored by most civilizations, it launched physical projectiles. Kinetic rounds moving at significant fractions of light speed, followed by what appeared to be primitive explosive devices. The organic ships reacted with the same fluid grace they had shown against coalition forces, beginning their evasive maneuvers. But, something was different. The human weapons weren't aimed at where the enemy ships were, but where they would be. Each projectile struck with devastating accuracy, and the explosive devices that followed seemed designed to prevent the organic hulls from regenerating. One of the organic ships turned toward the human vessel, its mental voice projecting rage and hunger. Your species is unknown to us. You will be consumed first, as punishment for your interference. The human ship's response came through traditional communication channels, the voice calm and professional. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the UES Prometheus. I've got bad news for you. Humans don't taste good, we're incredibly hard to digest, and we've got a really bad habit of fighting back even after we're supposedly dead. What happened next would be burned into ZYX memory forever. The human ship didn't simply engage the organic vessels in combat. It hunted them. Every maneuver was calculated to cause maximum damage while minimizing exposure to return fire. When one of the creatures managed to land a hit, punching through the human ship's armor, the hull seemed to repair itself through what could only be described as controlled explosions, sealing breaches by detonating small charges that fused the metal. But, the most terrifying part wasn't the human tactics or technology. It was the complete absence of fear in Captain Chen's voice. Where coalition officers had spoken with barely controlled terror, where the organic creatures projected rage and hunger, the humans sounded almost bored. Like this was just another day at the office. The battle lasted another 23 minutes. When it was over, 4 organic ships drifted dead in space, their hulls cracked and leaking some kind of purple fluid into the vacuum. The 5th ship attempted to retreat, only to discover that the human vessel had somehow mined its escape route while the battle was in progress. As the Prometheus moved to assist the badly damaged Talon of Vengeance, ZYX found herself staring at the tactical display in disbelief. One ship, crewed by members of a species barely 2 centuries into space travel, had defeated an enemy that had destroyed an entire coalition battle group. Coalition vessel, Captain Chen's voice crackled through the communication system. We're reading multiple hull breaches on your ship. Request permission to come aboard and assist with damage control. ZYX mandibles clicked nervously. Standard coalition protocol prohibited allowing unknown species aboard military vessels. But, standard protocol hadn't anticipated this situation. Permission granted, Captain Chen. And, thank you. Don't thank us yet, came the reply, and ZYX thought she detected something strange in the human's tone. Not quite sadness, not quite regret, but something that made her dorsal plates ripple with unease. You haven't seen what we're really capable of. 2 hours later, as human engineers worked alongside her crew to repair critical systems, ZYX watched Captain Chen examine the remains of one of the organic ships through the viewscreen. The human woman was small by coalition standards, barely reaching ZYX Thoreau's midsection, with pale skin and dark hair that she kept tied back in a functional style. Nothing about her appearance suggested the tactical genius that had just saved them all. Captain Chen, ZYX Thoreau began carefully, "My crew and I owe you our lives. But, I must ask, how did you defeat these creatures so easily? Our intelligence suggested they were beyond current military capabilities." Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring at the drifting alien corpse. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "You know what the problem is with most galactic civilizations, Commander? You've forgotten how to be afraid." ZYX Thoreau's translator struggled with the concept. "I do not understand." "Fear is what kept us alive when we were still climbing down from the trees," Chen explained. "It's what drove us to build better weapons, stronger walls, faster ships. Most species, once they reach the stars, they start to think they're safe. They forget that there's always something bigger and hungrier out there." She turned to face ZYX Thoreau, and the coalition commander was struck by the intensity in the human's eyes. They were the color of Earth's sky, Chen had mentioned earlier, but there was something predatory in them that reminded ZYX Thoreau of the hunting cats from her homeworld. "Humans never forgot," Chen continued. "We've been fighting for survival since the day we first stood upright. We've had ice ages and plagues and wars that killed hundreds of millions. We've faced extinction so many times that it's become part of our cultural memory. So when something like this shows up," she gestured toward the alien wreckage, "we don't panic. We just do what we've always done." "Which is?" Chen smiled, and ZYX Thoreau felt a chill run down her spine. "We figure out how to kill it." Over the next several hours, as repair work continued, ZYX Thoreau found herself drawn into conversations with the human crew members. They were friendly enough, eager to share stories about their homeworld and their journey to the stars. But, the more she learned about them, the more unsettled she became. They spoke casually about things that would have traumatized most coalition species. Wars that lasted decades. Weapons capable of destroying entire planets. Political systems that seemed to thrive on conflict and competition. One young engineer, barely out of adolescence by human standards, described growing up in something called the Australian outback, where apparently every form of plant and animal life was actively trying to kill you. "Doesn't that make you afraid?" ZYX Thoreau asked. The engineer looked confused. "Of what?" "That's just Tuesday where I'm from." It was during these conversations that ZYX Thoreau began to understand what Captain Chen had meant. Humans didn't just fight to survive. They enjoyed it. Not in a sadistic way, but with the enthusiasm of a species that had been honed by millions of years of constant warfare into the perfect predators. When the repairs were finally complete and the human crew prepared to return to their ship, Captain Chen approached ZYX Thoreau one final time. "Commander, I need to ask you something, and I need you to give me an honest answer," Chen said. "How long has the coalition been fighting these things?" "These were the first confirmed sightings," ZYX Thoreau replied. "Though there have been unexplained disappearances of ships and colonies over the past several cycles." Chen nodded grimly. "They're called devourers. We've been tracking them for about 6 months now. They've already consumed at least 7 civilizations that we know of." The number hit ZYX Thoreau like a physical blow. 7 civilizations. Billions of lives. "Why didn't you warn us?" she demanded. "We tried," Chen said quietly. "Your coalition council dismissed our reports as primitive superstition. Said humans weren't advanced enough to understand the complexities of galactic politics." Her expression hardened. "They're about to learn how complex galactic politics can get when your survival is on the line." As the human ship prepared to depart, Chen transmitted a set of coordinates to the Talon of Vengeance. "If your leaders are interested in actually fighting back instead of just dying with dignity, have them contact us at those coordinates. We'll be waiting." The Prometheus disappeared into hyperspace, leaving ZYX Thoreau alone with her thoughts and her wounded ship. She stared at the coordinates on her display, knowing that transmitting them to Coalition Command would change everything. Once the Council learned what humans were capable of, there would be no going back to the comfortable assumptions that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. But, as she looked at the wreckage of the Devourer ships, still drifting cold and dead in space, she realized that those comfortable assumptions had already been shattered. The galaxy had a new apex predator, and, for the first time in her long career, ZYX wasn't sure which side terrified her more. The monsters who consumed civilizations for food, or the humans who hunted monsters for sport. The Coalition High Command Chamber on Veltar Prime had seen many crises over its 1,000-year history. Wars between member species, first contact protocols gone wrong, resource disputes that threatened to tear apart carefully negotiated alliances. But, as ZYX stood before the assembled representatives of 18 different civilizations, she could sense that this was different. The air recycling systems couldn't quite mask the scent of fear that permeated the vast amphitheater. High Counselor Turvash, an ancient Nexari whose crystalline body had grown cloudy with age, leaned forward on his floating platform. Commander ZYX, you are asking us to believe that a single ship crewed by humans destroyed 5 vessels that had eliminated an entire coalition battle group? That is correct, High Counselor. ZYX kept her voice steady, though her dorsal plates wanted to ripple with frustration. She had been recounting the events at Kepler Station for 3 hours, answering the same questions repeatedly from different council members who seemed unable to accept what she was telling them. Counselor Quinn Mara of the Veltarun hegemony spoke next, her melodious voice carrying a note of disdain. The humans are barely out of their single-system infancy. Their technology is primitive, their society chaotic. How could they possibly succeed where our finest military units failed? Before ZYX could respond, a new voice cut through the chamber. Perhaps because we haven't spent the last 1,000 years forgetting how to fight. Every eye in the chamber turned toward the source of the voice. Standing at the chamber's main entrance were 5 humans, led by a woman ZYX recognized as Captain Chen. But, this wasn't the battle-worn ship captain she had met at Kepler Station. This version of Sarah Chen wore what appeared to be formal diplomatic attire, though ZYX noticed that the outfit was designed to allow for quick movement and seemed to have several concealed pockets that could hide weapons. High Counselor Turvash's crystalline structure flared with indignant light. This is a closed session of the Coalition High Command. How did you gain access to this chamber? Captain Chen smiled, and ZYX felt that familiar chill. We walked in through the front door. Your security is adequate for dealing with civilized species. The implications of that statement sent a ripple of unease through the assembled counselors. The Coalition Command Complex was one of the most heavily defended installations in the galaxy, protected by shields that could withstand planet-killer weapons and guarded by an army of the Coalition's finest soldiers. Impossible, declared General Krexthor, the Kethmori military representative. His forearms gestured emphatically as his translator rendered his clicks and hisses into galactic standard. No unauthorized personnel can access this chamber. The human standing behind Chen, a tall man with graying hair and scars that suggested extensive combat experience, held up a small device. Your authorization codes are surprisingly easy to crack when you use the same encryption algorithms for everything. Also, your guards are very trusting when you tell them you're here for a scheduled appointment. You hacked Coalition security systems? Counselor Quinn Mara's voice rose to a pitch that made several species wince. That is an act of war. No, Chen said calmly, that's a demonstration. We came here because Commander ZYX transmitted our coordinates to your leadership, and we assumed you would want to discuss the Devourer threat like rational beings. If we had wanted to commit an act of war, you would already be dead. The silence that followed was deafening. ZYX watched as the most powerful beings in known space struggled to process what they were hearing. These humans had penetrated their most secure facility, apparently without triggering a single alarm, and were now standing in their most sacred chamber acting like they owned the place. High Counselor Turvash managed to recover first. You dare to threaten the Coalition High Command? We dare to state facts, Chen replied. The Devourers have consumed 7 civilizations in the past 6 months. Your military response has been to send ships to die with dignity rather than adapt to face a new threat. Meanwhile, human forces have engaged them 17 times and emerged victorious in every encounter. General Krexthor's mandibles clicked with skepticism. 17 encounters? Our intelligence shows no record of these battles. The scarred human behind Chen stepped forward. Colonel Marcus Webb, Human Colonial Marines. The reason your intelligence shows no record is because we don't leave witnesses among the enemy forces. And we don't broadcast our victories because we learned a long time ago that predators are attracted to noise. Counselor ZYX Mina of the Altari Collective, an ethereal being of pure energy contained within a crystalline framework, spoke for the first time. You speak of the Devourers as if they are mere animals. Our xenobiologists believe them to be a highly advanced species with technology beyond our understanding. Your xenobiologists are half right, Chen said. They are highly advanced. But they're not just animals. They're something worse. They're what happens when a civilization advances so far that they forget the basic rules of survival and start treating other sapient beings as nothing more than food. She touched a control on her wrist, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. The image showed a star system that ZYX didn't recognize, but she could see the signs of advanced civilization. Massive orbital platforms, ring worlds around gas giants, the controlled stellar engineering that only the most advanced species could achieve. This was the Threndal Empire, Chen continued. Population of approximately 40 billion across 37 worlds. They had existed for over 5,000 years, long enough to develop technology that made them effectively immortal. They had solved every problem their species had ever faced. Hunger, disease, war, scarcity. They had created a perfect society. The hologram shifted, showing the same system but changed. The orbital platforms were twisted ruins. The ring worlds were broken, their massive structures collapsed into spiraling debris. The star itself seemed dimmer, as if something had been feeding on it. This is what the system looks like now. The Threndal didn't become extinct. They became something else. They consumed their own ecosystem so completely that they had to look elsewhere for sustenance. And they discovered that other sapient beings provided a much more interesting form of nourishment than mere matter and energy. High Counselor Tervash's crystalline body dimmed with horror. You're saying the Devourers were once a member of the galactic community? We're saying they're what happens when a species becomes so advanced that they forget they're still just animals fighting for survival, Colonel Webb answered. They started seeing other civilizations as resources to be harvested rather than peers to be respected. The chamber erupted in discussion as the implications sank in. Several counselors were already accessing their personal communication devices, probably sending urgent messages to their homeworlds. ZYX could see the fear in their movements, the sudden understanding that their own advanced civilizations might be vulnerable to the same transformation. Captain Chen waited for the noise to die down before continuing. The good news is that they can be stopped. The bad news is that stopping them requires tactics and weapons that most civilized species consider unacceptable. What do you mean? Asked Counselor Tervash. Chen gestured to the hologram, which now showed a tactical display of one of the human devourer battles. ZYX recognized it as similar to what she had witnessed at Kepler Station, but this one was on a much larger scale. Dozens of ships on each side, massive weapons exchanges, and orbital bombardments that would have been considered war crimes if used against coalition forces. The Devourers understand only one thing: superior predation. You can't negotiate with them because they don't see you as equals. You can't intimidate them because they've forgotten what fear feels like. You can't outrun them because they're patient enough to hunt you across centuries. The only way to deal with them is to become something they're afraid of. General Krexthor studied the tactical display with professional interest. Your weapons technology appears to be extensive. But nothing I see here exceeds coalition capabilities. That's because you're looking at the wrong thing, Webb said. It's not about the weapons. It's about the willingness to use them. The hologram shifted again, showing what appeared to be a devourer vessel that had been boarded by human forces. ZYX watched in fascination and growing horror as armored human soldiers moved through the organic corridors of the enemy ship. They weren't just fighting the Devourers. They were systematically dismantling them, studying them, learning how they functioned at the most fundamental level. Coalition military doctrine emphasizes minimizing casualties and collateral damage, Chen explained. Very civilized. Very humane. Also very ineffective against an enemy that sees mercy as weakness and restraint as an invitation to feed. She touched her control again, and the hologram showed human soldiers doing something that made ZYX Thera's stomach turn. They were dissecting living devourers, apparently to understand their biology well enough to develop more effective weapons. That's torture, Counselor Quinn-Mara gasped. That's research, Webb corrected coldly. When something is trying to eat your species, you learn everything you can about how to kill it. The devourers have been studying us for months, trying to understand our weaknesses. We've been returning the favor. High Counselor Turvash raised one crystalline appendage for silence. Captain Chen, what exactly are you proposing? Chen's expression became serious. An alliance. You provide us with intelligence, logistics support, and access to coalition space. We provide you with the one thing you can't seem to provide for yourselves, victory. And, what would you want in return? Asked Counselor ZYX Mina. Nothing you're not already losing, Chen said. The devourers are going to consume this entire spiral arm within the next 10 years if they're not stopped. We're offering you a chance to survive. The discussion that followed lasted for hours. ZYX Thera found herself assigned as a liaison between the human delegation and the council, a position that gave her the opportunity to observe both sides more closely. The more she learned about humanity's approach to warfare, the more unsettled she became. During a break in the proceedings, she found herself alone with Captain Chen in one of the chamber's side rooms. Captain, may I ask you something in confidence? Of course. Your species has been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. How have you developed such effective military tactics in such a short time? Chen was quiet for a moment, staring out through the room's viewing port at the stars beyond. Commander, how long has it been since your species faced an extinction-level threat? ZYX Thera considered the question. The Great Plague, perhaps 3,000 years ago. But that was a natural disaster, not warfare. For humans, it was last Tuesday. Chen's voice was matter-of-fact. We've faced extinction so many times that we've developed cultural and technological reflexes for it. Nuclear war, asteroid impacts, climate change, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering disasters, first contact gone wrong. Every generation of humans has lived with the knowledge that our species might not survive to see the next one. That must be terrifying. Chen smiled, but there was no humor in it. Commander, do you know what humans call the feeling of being hunted by something that wants to eat us? What? Tuesday. The formal vote came 3 days later. 16 species voted to accept the human alliance. 2 abstained. 0 voted against it. As ZYX Thera watched the humans sign the formal documents, she couldn't shake the feeling that the coalition had just made a deal with something that might be more dangerous than the devourers themselves. After the ceremony, as the human delegation prepared to return to their ships, Captain Chen approached her one final time. Commander, I want you to understand something. This alliance is going to change everything. The way you fight wars, the way you think about survival, the way you see your place in the universe. Some of your people are going to have trouble adapting to that. Are you warning me about something, Captain? Chen looked out at the stars again, and, when she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. Humanity has a saying, when you stare into the abyss stares back into you. The devourers are the abyss, Commander. And, we've been staring into it for a very long time. I just want you to be prepared for what you might see when you look at us after this war is over. As the human ships departed from Veltar Prime, ZYX Thera found herself wondering if the coalition had just saved itself or doomed itself. The humans were offering victory against an implacable enemy, but what would the galaxy look like when the fighting was done? She had seen what humans were capable of when they were being merciful and restrained. The thought of what they might become when they were truly unleashed kept her awake for many nights to come. But sleep became a luxury none of them could afford, because 3 days after the alliance was signed, the Devourers launched their largest offensive yet. 12 coalition worlds came under attack simultaneously, and, for the first time in galactic history, someone was ready to fight back. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you gave humans permission to win at any cost. The first coordinated Devourer offensive began at 0347 Galactic Standard Time on the 13th day of the coalition calendar's 7th month. 12 worlds, spread across 4 sectors, came under attack within a 6-hour window. The precision of the assault was terrifying in its implications. The Devourers hadn't just been randomly hunting. They had been planning, studying coalition defenses, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. ZYX stood in the command center of the newly established Joint Operations Facility on Kepler Prime, watching the tactical displays with a growing sense of dread. Each red icon on the holographic star map represented a world under siege. Millions of coalition citizens were fighting for their lives while she watched from the safety of a heavily shielded command bunker. Status report, she called out to the mixed human and coalition staff that populated the command center. Lieutenant Commander Torres, a compact human woman with intricate tattoos covering her arms, looked up from her console. Velta-run homeworld is holding, but barely. The orbital defense platforms are taking heavy damage. Kethmori colonies at Sigma Draconis have gone dark completely. And the civilian evacuation from New Geneva is only 60% complete. ZYX felt her stomach clench. New Geneva was a coalition colony world with over 8 million inhabitants, mostly Altari refugees who had fled their homeworld during the civil wars 3 decades ago. If the Devourers reached the surface before the evacuation was complete. What about human response forces? She asked. Admiral Harrison is en route to Veltar with Battle Group Alpha. Captain Chen is heading for the Kethmori colonies with a fast attack squadron. And Admiral Reyes is coordinating the New Geneva evacuation. Torres paused, consulting another display. Admiral Harrison requests permission to implement Protocol 7 at Veltar. The command center fell silent. Even the coalition officers who had only been working with humans for 3 weeks understood what Protocol 7 meant. ZYX had read the human tactical manuals, though she had hoped she would never see those particular procedures used in practice. Approved, she said quietly. Protocol 7 was what humans called total warfare. No rules of engagement, no restrictions on weapons usage, no concern for collateral damage to enemy assets. When humans implemented Protocol 7, they stopped trying to be civilized and focused entirely on killing their enemies in the most efficient way possible. The first reports came in an hour later. Admiral Harrison's forces had engaged the Devourer fleet at Veltar, and the battle was unlike anything in coalition military history. Instead of the careful, methodical exchanges of fire that characterized most space battles, the humans had launched what could only be described as a berserker attack. Admiral Harrison's flagship just rammed a Devourer capital ship, reported Ensign Quindar, a young Veltarun who was serving as communications liaison. The translator struggled with the disbelief in her voice. The collision destroyed both vessels, but the explosion took out 3 other Devourer ships. ZYX mandibles clicked in confusion. Rammed? As in a deliberate collision? That's what the sensor data indicates, confirmed Captain Morrison, a grizzled human officer who served as Harrison's liaison to the Joint Command. The Admiral probably ejected in an escape pod at the last second, but the ship's AI would have been programmed to maintain course and speed. That's suicide. Morrison shrugged. That's efficiency. 1 ship for 4 ships is excellent mathematics. Over the next 12 hours, ZYX watched as human tactics evolved in real time to counter Devourer capabilities. When energy weapons proved insufficient to penetrate the organic armor, humans switched to kinetic rounds accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. When the Devourer's self-healing abilities negated conventional explosives, humans deployed weapons that released self-replicating nanomachines designed to prevent cellular regeneration. But the most disturbing development came from Captain Chen's forces at the Kethmori colonies. 3 hours into the battle, Chen had requested permission to implement what humans called biowarfare protocols. Absolutely not, General Krexthor had responded immediately when the request was forwarded to the coalition command staff. The use of biological weapons is forbidden by 17 different galactic treaties. Captain Morrison had looked up from his console with an expression that ZYX was beginning to recognize as uniquely human. It was the look of someone explaining something to a child who didn't understand why the house was on fire. General, with respect, those treaties were written to govern warfare between civilized species. The Devourers literally eat civilizations for breakfast. They're not going to file a formal complaint if we violate the Biological Weapons Convention. The debate that followed was brief but intense. Coalition officers argued about legal precedents and moral obligations while the tactical displays showed Kethmori defensive positions being overrun one by one. In the end, it was High Counselor Turvash who made the decision. Captain Chen has permission to use any means necessary to protect Coalition citizens, he announced over the command frequency. Legal and moral considerations are hereby suspended for the duration of the current crisis. What happened next would become the subject of classified reports and psychological evaluations for years to come. Captain Chen's ships began deploying what human files labeled as adaptive pathogens. These were engineered viruses designed to attack the specific cellular structure of devourer organisms, spreading through their bioships like digital viruses spreading through a computer network. The results were effective. Devourer fleet at Sigma Draconis is disintegrating, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres, her voice carefully neutral. Enemy vessels are losing structural integrity and falling apart in space. ZYX watched the sensor data with fascination and horror. The organic ships that had seemed so terrifyingly alive were now writhing in space like wounded animals, their hull surfaces blistering and dissolving. Some of the smaller vessels simply fell apart, their component organisms no longer able to maintain cohesion. How long will the pathogen remain active? Asked Dr. Velmanis, the Coalition's chief xenobiologist. Captain Morrison consulted his datapad. Current projections suggest it will burn out within 72 hours. The nanomachines are designed to self-destruct once they've consumed all available target material. And if it mutates? If it begins affecting other organic life forms? Morrison's expression didn't change. Then, we'll deploy a counteragent to neutralize it. The casual way he said it sent chills through the Coalition officers. Humans apparently had contingency plans for their contingency plans, and none of those plans seemed to consider the possibility that they might be going too far. By the end of the first day, the tide of battle had turned decisively. 8 of the 12 worlds under attack had been successfully defended, and human forces were actively pursuing retreating devourer fleets. But it was the reports from the 4 colonies that had been overrun that truly demonstrated the difference between Coalition and human approaches to warfare. Coalition doctrine called for evacuating surviving population centers and establishing refugee camps on nearby worlds. Human doctrine called for immediate counterattack and recovery operations. Within 18 hours of losing contact with the surface of New Geneva, human forces had retaken the planet's orbital space and deployed ground forces to the surface. Status report from New Geneva, announced Ensign Quindar, and ZYX could hear the confusion in her voice. Colonel Webb reports that they've recovered the planet. Recovered? ZYX asked. The devourer forces that reached the surface have been eliminated. Colonial infrastructure is intact. Civilian casualties were minimal. That seemed impossible. Once devourers reached a planet's surface, they typically consumed everything organic within a matter of hours. Entire ecosystems would be stripped down to bare rock, with nothing left but twisted metal and empty cities. How minimal? ZYX asked carefully. Approximately 12,000 confirmed dead out of a population of 8.2 million. The number hit the command center like a physical blow. 12,000 deaths was still a tragedy, but it represented a survival rate that no coalition force had ever achieved against the devourers. How had humans managed to save over 99% of the population? The answer came in Colonel Webb's after-action report, filed 3 hours later. ZYX read it in her private office, away from the eyes of her staff, because she wasn't sure how they would react to the contents. Human forces had deployed what they called environmental warfare against the devourers on New Geneva's surface. Instead of trying to fight the creatures directly, they had changed the planet's atmosphere to make it toxic to devourer physiology. Targeted release of industrial chemicals, manipulation of weather patterns to create acid rain, and deployment of bioengineered organisms that attack the devourer's ability to process organic matter. The report was clinically detailed about the process by which an entire planetary ecosystem had been temporarily poisoned to kill the invaders, then systematically cleaned and restored within a matter of hours. The casual efficiency of it was breathtaking. But it was the final paragraph that made ZYX-Thera's blood run cold. Environmental warfare protocols proved highly effective against devourer ground forces. Recommend expanding deployment to other threatened worlds. Note: current techniques can be adapted for use against any carbon-based lifeform. See attached appendices for species-specific modifications. The humans hadn't just developed a way to kill devourers. They had developed a way to kill anyone, anywhere, with the efficiency of flipping a switch. And they had done it in less than 24 hours. Over the following weeks, as human coalition forces pressed their advantage and began actively hunting devourer fleets, ZYX-Thera found herself spending more and more time studying human military procedures. What she learned kept her awake at night. Humans had contingency plans for fighting every member species of the coalition. Not vague strategic assessments, but detailed operational plans complete with targeting priorities and deployment schedules. They had identified the critical weaknesses of each civilization and developed weapons specifically designed to exploit those weaknesses. When she confronted Captain Chen about it during one of their regular briefings, the human woman's response was matter of fact. "Commander, we're at war with an enemy that has already demonstrated the ability to corrupt and co-opt entire civilizations. Part of our job is to be prepared for the possibility that any coalition member might be compromised." "You're talking about planning to commit genocide against your allies." Chen's expression didn't change. "We're talking about planning to save the galaxy from a threat that has already killed billions of sentient beings. If that requires some unpleasant contingency planning, then that's what we do." The conversation that followed was one of the most disturbing of ZYX-Thera's life. Chen calmly explained that humans had learned, through their long history of warfare, that the best way to preserve peace was to be prepared for any possible conflict. They had studied every coalition species not out of malice, but out of pragmatic necessity. "The devourers aren't the only threat the galaxy faces," Chen pointed out. "What happens when this war is over? Do you really think every coalition member is going to peacefully return to the status quo? Do you think there won't be resentment, territorial disputes, demands for reparations?" ZYX-Thera wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Already, there were tensions within the coalition. Some species resented humanity's growing influence. Others wanted to claim salvaged devourer technology for themselves. The Kethmori were making territorial demands based on their losses during the war. "So you're planning for the next war before this one is even over?" "We're planning for the possibility that there might be a next war," Chen corrected. "And we're making sure that if there is, it will be very short and very one-sided." As if to emphasize her point, the tactical display lit up with incoming reports. Another devourer fleet had been located and engaged by human forces. The battle lasted 17 minutes and ended with the complete annihilation of 37 enemy vessels. ZYX-Thera watched the sensor data and realized that she was witnessing the birth of a new galactic order. The coalition had asked humans to save them from the devourers, and humans were doing exactly that. But, in the process, they were demonstrating that they had the capability to destroy anyone who might threaten them in the future. The galaxy was about to be saved by its newest and most dangerous apex predator. And ZYX-Thera was beginning to wonder if that was really an improvement. The breakthrough came 6 months after the first coordinated devourer offensive, in a way that no coalition scientist had anticipated and few would ever fully understand. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had transitioned from military command to leading the Xenobiology Research Division, made an announcement that would forever change how the galaxy viewed both the devourers and their human allies. ZYX-Thera stood in the sterile white research laboratory deep beneath the surface of Kepler Prime, staring at something that defied everything she thought she knew about the nature of their enemy. The specimen floating in the containment field looked like a standard devourer organism, but the readings on the surrounding monitors told a different story entirely. "This is impossible," whispered Dr. Velmanis, the Coalition's chief xenobiologist. His 8 sensory stalks were twitching with agitation as he tried to process the data streams flowing across his portable analysis unit. "The genetic markers, they're not alien." Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "That's what we thought at first too. But, after analyzing 17 different specimens from 8 separate encounters, the conclusion is unavoidable." She touched a control surface, and the holographic display showed a complex genetic map. "The devourers aren't some ancient alien species. They're us." The silence that followed was deafening. ZYX felt her respiratory system struggle to function as the implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. "What do you mean, they're us?" "I mean that every devourer organism we've analyzed contains genetic material from known coalition species," Chen explained, her voice clinical and detached. "Veltarun neural structures, Kethmori combat adaptations, Nexari crystalline matrices, Altari energy processing capabilities. They're not conquering civilizations. They're incorporating them." Dr. Velmanis was frantically checking his readings, his translator struggling to keep up with the rapid-fire clicks and whistles he was emitting. "But the temporal analysis shows these organisms are ancient. Some of the genetic patterns date back millions of years." "Because they've been doing this for millions of years," Chen said quietly. "Species after species, civilization after civilization. They find a new form of intelligent life, study it, consume it, and add its biological and technological distinctiveness to their collective. The devourers aren't aliens. They're the galaxy's ultimate recycling program." ZYX legs gave out, and she found herself leaning against the laboratory wall for support. "The Threndal Empire you showed us became devourers approximately 50,000 years ago, based on carbon dating of their genetic contributions. They were probably the ones who developed the consciousness transfer technology that allows individual minds to persist even after biological incorporation." Chen's expression was grim. "Which means that somewhere in every devourer fleet, there are beings who still remember being Threndal. And Yithmori. And Kalesh. And dozens of other species whose names we'll never learn because they were consumed before they could leave any records." The laboratory fell silent except for the hum of containment fields and the soft whisper of air recycling systems. ZYX stared at the devourer specimen, trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she was hearing. The creature in the containment field wasn't just a monster. It was a graveyard of civilizations, a walking tomb containing the memories and genetic heritage of species that had been extinct for millennia. "How many?" she asked quietly. "We've identified genetic markers from at least 47 distinct species in this single specimen," Chen replied. "Our xenoarchaeology team estimates that could represent anywhere from 200 to 300 different civilizations, depending on how much genetic diversity existed within each species." Dr. Velmanis looked up from his analysis unit, his sensory stalks drooping with exhaustion. 300 civilizations. 300 entire species, reduced to genetic components in a single organism. "And that's just one specimen," Chen added. "We've captured 17 of them. Each one contains unique genetic combinations, suggesting that the devourers maintain vast libraries of biological information harvested from their victims over millions of years." ZYX forced herself to approach the containment field, studying the creature that floated within. Now that she knew what to look for, she could see it. The slight luminescence in its skin that resembled Altari energy patterns. The segmented limbs that echoed Kethmori anatomy. The neural cluster visible through its translucent skull that bore an unsettling resemblance to Veltarun brain structures. "Can they be separated?" she asked. "Can the individual species be recovered?" Chen shook her head. "The integration is complete at the cellular level. The consciousness patterns we've detected suggest that individual memories and personalities do persist within the collective, but they're distributed across the entire organism. Separating them would be like trying to unmix different colors of paint after they've been stirred together." The implications were staggering. Every devourer they had fought contained the memories of hundreds of extinct civilizations. Every ship they had destroyed had been crewed by beings who had once been poets and scientists and parents, now reduced to components in a galaxy-spanning organic machine whose only purpose was to consume and incorporate new forms of life. "There's more," Chen said, and something in her tone made ZYX-Thera's blood run cold. "We've been analyzing the tactical data from all our encounters with devourer forces. They're not fighting us the way they fought previous civilizations." "What do you mean?" Chen activated another holographic display, showing a comparison between devourer tactics used against coalition forces versus reconstructed data from their historical conquests. Against every previous civilization, the devourers used overwhelming force and biological warfare. They would simply swarm their targets, consume everything organic, and move on to the next system. But, against us, they've been experimenting. The data was undeniable. Devourer attacks against coalition worlds had followed patterns that suggested they were testing different approaches, studying human responses, and adapting their strategies in real time. It wasn't the behavior of creatures driven by simple hunger. It was the behavior of researchers conducting a long-term study. "They're not trying to consume us quickly," ZYX-Thera realized. "They're trying to understand us first. Specifically, they're trying to understand humans," Chen confirmed. Every major engagement has involved probing attacks designed to test human capabilities and limitations. They're not fighting a war of conquest. They're fighting a war of analysis. Dr. Velmanis looked up from his datapad, his translator rendering his distress calls into Galactic Standard. "Why would they need to study humans differently? What makes your species special?" Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring at the specimen floating in the containment field. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because we're the first species they've encountered that fights back effectively. Every other civilization either surrendered quickly or was overwhelmed by superior numbers. But humans have been winning. The laboratory's environmental systems seem to struggle with the sudden tension in the room." ZYX-Thera felt her respiratory rate increase as she processed the implications of what Chen was saying. "You think they're studying humans to learn how to incorporate human capabilities into their collective," she said slowly. "I think they've been planning it from the beginning," Chen replied. "Think about it. Humans have something that no previous civilization had, the cultural and genetic adaptations necessary to fight effectively against overwhelming odds. We've survived every extinction-level event our planet ever threw at us. We've developed technologies and tactics specifically designed to kill things that are bigger and stronger than we are." She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed human battle tactics overlaid with devourer capabilities. Imagine devourer regeneration capabilities combined with human strategic thinking. Devourer biotechnology guided by human engineering instincts. The collective consciousness of hundreds of species focused through human aggression and adaptability. The picture that emerged was terrifying. The devourers hadn't been trying to destroy humanity. They had been trying to recruit humanity. Every battle, every engagement, every tactical exchange had been part of an extended job interview for the position of apex predator in their galactic collective. "We need to inform Coalition Command immediately," Dr. Velmanis said, already moving toward the communication console. "Wait," Chen called after him, and something in her tone made him freeze. "There's one more thing you need to understand before we report this." She touched the control surface again, and a holographic display changed to show human genetic analysis. The data scrolled past faster than ZYX-Thera could read, but she could see enough to understand what she was looking at. "We've been analyzing human genetic material to compare it with the devourer specimens," Chen explained. "Looking for any signs of previous contact, any evidence that humans might have encountered devourers in our evolutionary past. And we found something. But it's not what you might expect." The display focused on a specific genetic sequence, highlighting certain markers in red. "These are genetic modifications. Artificial alterations to the human genome that enhance our capacity for strategic thinking, pattern recognition, and adaptive response to existential threats." ZYX-Thera felt the world tilt beneath her feet. you're saying humans have been genetically modified? I'm saying humans were designed, Chen said quietly, by someone with a very sophisticated understanding of evolutionary biology and a very specific set of goals in mind. The implications crashed over the laboratory like a tsunami. If humans had been artificially created, then someone had wanted them to be exactly what they were, the perfect weapon for fighting the Devourers. But who could have had that kind of foresight? Who could have anticipated the Devourer threat and prepared humanity to face it? The timeline fits, Chen continued, as if reading ZYX Thera's thoughts. The genetic modifications were introduced approximately 2 million years ago, during the period when proto-humans were developing the cognitive capabilities that would eventually lead to civilization. Someone took our ancestors and turned them into the perfect anti-devourer weapon. Dr. Velmanis had abandoned his attempt to reach the communication console and was staring at Chen with all 8 sensory stalks focused on her. Who could have done this? Chen looked at the devourer specimen floating in the containment field, and, when she spoke, her voice carried a weight of terrible understanding. Someone who knew the devourers were coming. Someone who had encountered them before and survived long enough to prepare for the next encounter. Someone who understood that the only way to fight a collective of consumed civilizations was to create a species specifically designed for that purpose. She paused, letting the implications sink in. I think we're looking at the galaxy's previous attempt to solve the devourer problem. And I think whoever created humanity expected us to do exactly what we've been doing, win at any cost. The laboratory fell silent as they all stared at the creature in the containment field, the living graveyard of 300 extinct civilizations. But now it represented something even more horrifying, proof that humanity's greatest enemy might also be humanity's creator. ZYX Thera realized that she was witnessing the moment when the galaxy's understanding of itself fundamentally changed. The Devourers weren't just an external threat to be defeated. They were part of a cycle that had been repeating for millions of years, and humanity wasn't the galaxy's savior. Humanity was the galaxy's final weapon, created by some long-dead civilization as their last desperate attempt to break the cycle of consumption and incorporation that had already claimed hundreds of species. And the most terrifying part was that it seemed to be working. The war against the Devourers officially ended on a Tuesday. Not with a grand battle or a dramatic confrontation, but with a simple communication broadcast across all frequencies in the galaxy. The message was delivered by Admiral Harrison, speaking from the bridge of the human flagship Prometheus as it orbited the former Devourer homeworld. This is Admiral Harrison of the human colonial fleet, broadcasting to all coalition forces and member civilizations. The Devourer threat has been neutralized. All enemy forces have been eliminated or contained. The galaxy is secure. ZYX Thera listened to the broadcast from her position aboard the Coalition Survey Vessel Investigation, currently stationed at the edge of what had once been Devourer space. Around her, Coalition officers from a dozen different species celebrated with the reserved enthusiasm typical of beings who had spent 2 years convinced they were about to die. But ZYX Thera couldn't bring herself to join in their relief. She had been present for the final phase of the human offensive, and what she had witnessed would haunt her for the rest of her life. The humans hadn't simply defeated the Devourers. They had systematically dismantled their entire civilization with the precision of surgeons and the efficiency of industrial machinery. Every Devourer fleet had been hunted down and destroyed. Every bioship had been analyzed, catalogued, and then reduced to component molecules. Every world that had served as a Devourer breeding ground had been sterilized so thoroughly that nothing organic could survive on their surfaces for the next 10,000 years. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what the humans had done with the Devourer specimens they had captured alive. Commander ZYX Thera, came a voice from her communication console. Admiral Harrison requests your presence aboard the Prometheus for a final briefing. ZYX Thera acknowledged the transmission and made her way to the shuttle bay. The journey to the human flagship took only 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. She had been dreading this moment since Dr. Chen's discoveries in the laboratory 6 months ago. The Prometheus had grown since the last time she had been aboard. What had once been a medium-sized cruiser was now a massive vessel, its hull expanded and modified with technology that no coalition species had ever seen. The ship looked almost organic now, its surfaces covered with what appeared to be living metal that pulsed with a rhythm suspiciously similar to a heartbeat. Admiral Harrison met her in the main conference room, along with Dr. Chen and a woman Zyxthera didn't recognize. The stranger was tall and pale, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge that made Zyxthera's skin crawl. "Commander, thank you for coming," Harrison said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "I'd like you to meet Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, director of our Xenobiology Integration Project." Zyxthera's translator struggled with the term integration project, finally, settling on a rendering that suggested some kind of synthesis or merging process. She didn't like the implications. Dr. Shaw has been leading our efforts to understand and utilize devourer biotechnology, Harrison continued. Her work has been instrumental in our victory. Dr. Shaw smiled, and Zyxthera noticed that her teeth were too white and too sharp. "Commander Zyxthera, I've heard a great deal about you. Dr. Chen tells me you've been very helpful in analyzing our captured specimens. What exactly is the Xenobiology Integration Project?" Zyxthera asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. Shaw and Harrison exchanged a look that conveyed volumes of unspoken communication. Finally, Shaw activated a holographic display that filled the center of the conference room with images that made Zyxthera's stomachs turn. The Devourers possessed several technological capabilities that would be extremely useful for defending the galaxy against future threats, Shaw explained as the display showed Devourer bioships being systematically dismantled by human engineers. Self-repairing hull materials, organic computing systems that can process information at quantum speeds, and, most importantly, the ability to incorporate beneficial traits from other species. The images shifted to show human laboratories where devourer organisms were being studied, dissected, and, apparently reverse-engineered. But, what disturbed Zyxthera most was seeing human volunteers being subjected to procedures that looked suspiciously like the biological integration processes the devourers had used on their victims. "You're experimenting on yourselves," she realized with horror. "We're evolving ourselves," Shaw corrected. The Devourers had the right idea about adaptation and incorporation. They just went about it in an unnecessarily destructive way. Dr. Chen leaned forward across the conference table. "Commander, humanity has always been defined by our ability to adapt to new threats. When we encountered the Devourers, we didn't just learn how to fight them. We learned how to become better than them." The holographic display now showed human soldiers who looked different. Taller, stronger, with skin that had the same subtle luminescence she had seen in devourer specimens. Their eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost alien, and, when they moved, it was with a fluid grace that no unmodified human could achieve. "These are our Integration Corps volunteers," Shaw explained proudly. "They've undergone controlled incorporation of beneficial devourer traits while maintaining their essential humanity. Enhanced strength, improved reflexes, accelerated healing, expanded cognitive capabilities, and, most importantly, the ability to interface directly with devourer biotechnology." Zyxthera stared at the images with growing dread. "You've turned yourselves into devourers." "We've turned ourselves into something better than devourers," Harrison corrected. "The original devourers were driven by instinct and hunger. Our Integration Corps maintains human intelligence, human creativity, and human moral reasoning. Think of them as devourers with a conscience." The briefing continued for another hour, with Shaw and Chen taking turns explaining the technical details of their integration processes. They spoke enthusiastically about enhanced human capabilities, about the technological advantages they had gained, about the new frontiers of human evolution that were now possible. But all Zyxthera could think about was Dr. Chen's earlier discovery about human origins. If humanity had been created as a weapon against the Devourers, then, what did it mean that they were now incorporating Devourer traits into themselves? Were they completing some kind of cycle, or were they breaking it? "There is one more matter we need to discuss," Admiral Harrison said as the briefing wound down. "The future of the Coalition." The holographic display changed to show a star map of Coalition space, but now it was overlaid with human fleet positions and territorial claims. ZYX realized with shock that human forces had established permanent bases in every major star system, positioned to monitor and control all interstellar traffic. The war against the Devourers demonstrated several critical weaknesses in coalition military and political structures, Harrison explained. Divided command authority, inadequate intelligence sharing, insufficient industrial capacity, and, most importantly, a fundamental lack of preparedness for existential threats. Shaw nodded in agreement. Our analysis suggests that without significant reforms, the coalition will be vulnerable to the next major threat that emerges. And, given the nature of galactic evolution, there will always be a next threat. ZYX felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of reforms are you suggesting? Centralized military command under human authority, Harrison said matter-of-factly. Standardized technology and communication protocols based on human devourer hybrid systems. And, most importantly, mandatory participation in our integration program for all coalition military personnel. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. ZYX stared at the three humans across from her, realizing that she was witnessing the birth of something that might be worse than the Devourers themselves. You're talking about conquest, she said quietly. We're talking about survival, Shaw replied. Commander, your species has been spacefaring for over 3,000 years, and, in all that time, you never developed the capability to defend yourselves against a truly existential threat. The Veltaron have been building fleets for 5 millennia, and they were helpless against the Devourers. The Nexari have computer networks that span entire star systems, and they couldn't even detect Devourer infiltration until it was too late. Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair, and, when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The galaxy needs shepherds, Commander. Species that are strong enough to protect the weak, smart enough to anticipate threats, and ruthless enough to do what needs to be done when those threats materialize. Humanity is accepting that responsibility. Whether we want you to or not, ZYX said. Whether you're capable of stopping us or not, Harrison corrected gently. Commander, human fleets currently control every major trade route, every strategic resource deposit, and every defensible position in coalition space. We've demonstrated the ability to defeat any military force that opposes us, and we've developed technology that makes us effectively immortal. The question isn't whether humanity will guide galactic civilization into the future. The question is whether the transition will be peaceful or violent. ZYX looked around the conference room, noting the subtle changes that had been made since her last visit. The walls were covered with the same living metal she had seen on the ship's exterior. The lighting had a quality that reminded her of Devourer bioluminescence. Even the air recycling system seemed to be based on organic processes rather than mechanical ones. The humans hadn't just defeated the Devourers. They had become them, improved them, and now they were offering the rest of the galaxy the choice between willing submission or involuntary incorporation. What happens to species that refuse your guidance? She asked. Shaw smiled, and this time ZYX could see that her teeth were definitely not human anymore. Commander, every species in this galaxy will eventually face a choice between evolution and extinction. We're simply offering to help with the evolution part. The meeting ended 20 minutes later, after Harrison had transmitted a formal proposal to the Coalition High Council outlining humanity's new role as galactic protectors. As ZYX made her way back to her shuttle, she passed through sections of the ship where she glimpsed human crew members who had undergone various degrees of integration. Some looked almost normal, with only subtle changes to their appearance. Others were clearly no longer entirely human, their bodies modified with Devourer biotechnology to the point where they might have been a completely new species. All of them moved with the same fluid grace, and all of them watched her with eyes that held knowledge she was grateful she couldn't comprehend. During the shuttle flight back to her ship, ZYX composed her final report to Coalition Command. She tried to find words to convey what she had learned, what she had witnessed, and what humanity had become. But, how do you explain to a civilization that their saviors had transformed into something that might be more dangerous than the threat they had been saved from? In the end, she settled for simplicity: the Devourer threat has been eliminated. However, our analysis suggests that humanity now possesses capabilities that exceed those of the original Devourers by several orders of magnitude. Recommend immediate diplomatic engagement to establish terms for the new galactic order, as military opposition is no longer a viable option. As she transmitted the report, ZYX reflected on Captain Shen's words from their first meeting: when you stare into the abyss stares back into you. The humans had stared into the devourer abyss and absorbed it, transformed it, made it part of themselves. The galaxy had been saved by its newest apex predator. And, now that predator was offering to protect everyone else, whether they wanted protection or not. ZYX realized that in fighting alongside humans, she had discovered a terror far worse than anything the devourers could have inflicted. She had discovered what happened when humanity's infinite capacity for adaptation met their equally infinite capacity for violence. The war was over. The occupation was about to begin. And, the most terrifying part was that humanity genuinely believed they were doing it for everyone's own good.